Well, I want to welcome everybody to this virtual room. My name is Eli. I'm the Director of Education at Park Pride. Just hit my 2-year mark at Park Pride, and I can say confidently that it feels like home. And I really love my job and my coworkers, and it's just been a blast, and things are going very well. I'm really excited to be able to host things like this and partner with content experts, people who are working on the ground doing this sort of work that have their knowledge to share. So very excited that we've got Michael Hudgins from Woodskeeper here tonight. We've also got my colleague Vanessa Mio here, and Vanessa and I will be monitoring the chat tonight. So let's try to couple of housekeeping things. Let's try to keep questions in the chat because we do have 50 people registered. And there's already 25 here. I imagine some more will drop in. So let's keep questions in the chat so it doesn't get too out of control. And I know that Michael has some breaks built into his slideshow to take questions as well. So Vanessa and I make up the education team. Vanessa is an education and advocacy specialist. And there's a couple of education related things we want to mention before we kick it over to Michael Hudgins. So this is the first in a two-part series. Now, it's not mandatory that you go to both parts, but they are complementary of each other. So this is obviously virtual. It's going to be followed up in February on Saturday, February 22nd, as part of the Love Your Park initiative, which is all of City of Atlanta. Every council district is represented. There's, I think, now at least 30 different projects spread throughout the month of February. The Love Your Park project in Spink Collins will be part two of this. Michael will be present there, and we'll have some on the ground kind of implementation of some of the stuff that we're talking about tonight. It'll be a good chance to get to know each other and share best practices and get some of this work done in that green space. Also, it's a fantastic green space if you have not been to Spink Collins. Highly recommend going either on February 22nd or some other time on your own. Also, we have our conference. Our annual conference is coming up, and Vanessa, I'm sure, is going to drop a link in the chat there for you. Our conference is on Monday, March 24th. Now, many years it's on the last Monday in March. That is not the case this year. It is the next to last Monday. And that's we had some scheduling conflicts, some things we wanted to avoid with City of Atlanta. So it's Monday, March 24th. It's going to be our largest curriculum we've ever had. We're looking at 18 breakout sessions. At least 3 of those are outdoor sessions, walks through the botanical garden. So I'm really looking forward to it. Got some great speakers. We've got this guy named John Wesolowski coming down from Chattanooga. He goes by the Happy Urbanist on Instagram, has fantastic urbanism content. We've got Hannah Palmer, local activist and writer, um, and she's going to share a bit about how her work overlaps with green spaces. And we have Tori Carter Canine, who is the CEO, president and CEO of the American Society of Landscape Architects. So he's coming from out of town as a keynote speaker as well. So, all right, Adina, I see you're reading one of Hannah Palmer's books. Yes. If I had a nickel for every person that told me that recently, I'd at least have a dollar or two. I need to get that book. I'm gonna see if the library has it actually.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think I think it has all her books or both of her books, yes.
Fantastic. So, if you are part of a friends group, which many people here are, you are eligible to apply for a scholarship to attend conference. So if it is cost prohibitive for you to pay the regular rate, we want folks to be able to attend. We don't want the bar to be too high. We don't want cost to be an issue. We want you there. So please do apply for that scholarship. And it's drastically reduced. I think it's like 75% off or something for the scholarship rate. All that information is on our website. There's also a nonprofit rate and then our regular rate as well. It will sell out. Last year, not only did it sell out, it was oversold. We had too many people there. So please get your tickets to conference. And I'm going to kick it over to Vanessa to mention a program that we have coming up in February that you might be interested in.
So we have what's called our second Friday walk in the park. The purpose of this program is to just shed light on some hidden gems that are within Metro Atlanta. So we will visit parks in Atlanta, DeKalb, as well as Brookhaven. I'm dropping the link in the chat for anyone who is interested. Our next walk will be on February 14th. So if you want to come out with your sweetheart, check out a new park, learn about the history, the culture of it, any past, present, or future projects that they have in the works. Um, Moving forward, we're actually going to be working with other organizations that are doing work within these parks and our neighboring businesses. So we're really excited to share this program with you all. If you have a friend, come on out. It's from 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock. Come with your walking shoes, come out and learn something and have a great time.
Highly encourage you to check out those if you're able to sneak away from work or other obligations on a Friday morning. And we do start promptly at 9 and we finish at 10. So it's all business, but it's all fun. You just show up. We will actually have pre-registration starting soon, but no cost or anything like that. And you'll be able to be on your way by 10 a.m. So tonight we have Michael Hudgins from Woodskeeper, who I'm going to brag on Michael a little bit before I turn it over to him. Michael and I have become friends, and he's working in a field that I spent a lot of time in myself on the nonprofit side of things, and I've kind of moved away from some of that on the ground work. But I have a deep respect for people that do work in these natural areas. I know that it is a labor of love. You're not doing it to get rich, that's for sure. And Michael is very passionate about green spaces. He is also a great teacher. I thoroughly love following his social media account, and I feel like I'm learning along with him. He's very good about sharing his journey with others. So if you don't follow Woodskeeper, I encourage you to do that. I invited Michael because I knew that he had mentioned setting up a guide for sort of looking at setting your invasive plant removal calendar. And I thought this is a great next step. We've got a lot of people in our friends network that know they need to address invasive species. This is kind of taking the next step at looking at how do I set up my calendar? Because it can be very overwhelming. This is not going to be a how-to, like just open your brains up and we just dump all the information in there. This is going to be to spark some interest and get the conversation going. And I expect that we'll get a lot out of this. We will provide the recording in a follow-up email. We will also provide the actual document that Michael has created, which is in very clean, nicely designed format that's easily shareable and printable as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our content expert and our guest speaker, Michael Hudgins.
Thank you, Eli, and thank you, Vanessa. Great to be here. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. This is going to be fun. So, fun and informative. But let's see. Well, how did we get here? How did we get to this point? Well, I started somewhere back in the 19th century where somebody decided it would be a good thing to plant privet as a privacy hedge. I've gone back too far. That's too far. So how did we get here? As Eli already said, he a couple months ago he reached out and he was saying, since timing is such a important, crucial part of this work, that there is a demand for people kind of wanting an invasive plant management calendar, and it's something that we've talked about in my crew with Woodskeeper. Something that we always say, hey, did we forget to do this or did we forget to that? We should make a calendar so that we don't forget these things during this time of the year. So kind of this is how this all came to fruition and we ended up, creating this guide. And it is kind of laid out side by side. First of all, I want to give a big shout out to Enrique Ipina from the Woodskeeper crew, who really helped out with the format. Sorry. The left and right columns that you see, that was Enrique's idea to kind of format it that way, that when you have a document pulled up on your phone, your tablet, or even printed out, is it as if you can see here. Oh, there it is. Front and back, but something that's easy to read. You know, we've crammed a lot of text on here, but we still think it's very readable and easy to use and easy to follow. And it is available for download. You can go to woodskeeper.com. There's a link right there where you can just click it and download it straight to your device. So let's jump into it.
Hey, Michael, I think
Yeah.
your audio is getting a little muffled. I don't know if it's when you lean back or if it's because you're on your
Okay.
phone, but it's kind of like waving in and out a little bit.
Okay. Good to know. I'll try to stay up close here. Does that sound good?
There might be the option. I don't know if your other device has a working mic on it, but we could try that
You
too.
want to try that? Okay.
So there's two Michaels here tonight, two Michael Hudgins. He's got his laptop and his phone, so bear with us here.
All right, what about now? Does it sound better?
Yeah, I think it's more consistent. Let's try that.
Okay. Y'all let me know if it sounds wonky.
It's not cutting out yet, so I say we go with it.
Okay. I think my headphones are the problem. Now I can't hear you, so hang on just a second.
You hear us now?
All
Can
right,
you hear
Eli.
Yeah. Can you hear the barred owl in my backyard that's calling right now?
Okay, I can hear you. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right, I think we're good to go. Let's get back in there.
Cool.
Turn to meeting. Still got my screen. All right, let's jump into it here. So at the top of this guide, we've got a big box that says important. This guide, it refers to mechanical removal by hand of non-native plants only. And I did put the definition of what an invasive plant is later in the guide, but let's go ahead and take a look at it just to give everybody a refresher. An invasive plant is a non-native plant. It outcompetes and displaces native species along with the local wildlife that depend on them. Introduced by humans, spread rapidly on their own, causes ecological harm. And now that we've established what is an invasive plant, that leads us to identification. Accurate identification and not necessarily seasons are going to determine your priorities. You want to get to know your surroundings. You want to know which invasive plants in your work area need immediate attention, which native plants in your work area kind of need immediate protection. And I can tell you a story that I've told many times about why it's important to get to know your surroundings before you just jump in and start doing the work. Many winters ago, I was clearing some invasive privet from around this huge silver maple tree. I was really excited about it because this maple tree was just covered in privet and all these invasive plants were all around it. And so I just went to town, just started uprooting all this privet. Felt really good about it. But at the time, I wasn't aware of a plant. I'd heard about it, but I really wasn't too familiar with it, called chaff flower. And it's something that I'm going to talk about a lot through this presentation, something I talk a lot about in our work in general, because it's one of those plants that is, to me, it's a red flag. And so back when I was removing that privet and those invasive plants around that maple tree, I was not aware, but this plant, Japanese chaff flower, in its winter form, was all around me. And if you know about this plant, you know the seeds will stick to you, and we'll talk more about this later. The seeds will stick to you, and you will unknowingly spread it to other areas. So So that's why it's really important to know your surroundings and know what plants are in your immediate vicinity so that you don't, perpetuate the spread unknowingly of these invasive plants. So that's what chaff flower looks like during the winter. You don't even notice, you don't even see it unless you're looking for it. Similar with stiltgrass. In the winter, it's just a big brown carpet on the ground. If you know about stiltgrass, it's an annual grass, so you figure that it's already done its thing, it's already seeded out, there's no harm. It doesn't pose a immediate threat in its winter form, right? But if you start raking this stuff around and moving it around, you're going to spread around those seeds, because the seeds in stiltgrass, there are some seeds that lie within those dead stalks. And so you can easily spread it around unknowingly if you're moving it around and not careful with it. And so that's what we mean when we say we want to know our surroundings, want to get to know it, and not even though chaff flower and stiltgrass are typically plants you target during summer, it's very important to know that they're in your workspace during the winter time as well. Again, accurate identification is crucial. iNaturalist is a great resource, both online plus the app. If you can take a picture, upload it, and it'll help you identify the plants. There are other ones out there, but I do believe iNat is the best. Common tools for this work include loppers, hand pruners, folding saw, soil knife, tarp, and a weed wrench. Weed wrenches are great they help you to pull out the woody shrubs. If you can't pull them out by hand, using leverage, the weed wrench will help you pull them out. And polarbear.com has got a wide variety of different sizes of uprooters and weed wrenches that you can choose from. So that's why I give their website a little plug there. Now, talked about seeds already. You want to be aware of invasive seeds. Any ripened seeds you want to try to bag best you can, bag and trash them. You always want to be mindful of erosion. We don't want to uproot plants. Well, there could be various reasons why we don't want to uproot a plant, even if we can. If it's on a steep slope, or if it's right on the creek bank, or maybe it's too big and you physically can't get it out of the ground, or maybe you don't want to cause that much soil disturbance. You don't want to leave big a hole in the ground. So there's a different reasons why you should not uproot a plant. And you want to be mindful of that erosion. Aftercare is a must. We don't want to just do a bunch of work and then forget about it. We want to, in the moment, we want to tamp down that disturbed soil, and you want to cover it back up, cover it with native organic material such as leaves and sticks. And you want to monitor and manage your previous work areas, right? There's no such thing as one and done. You want to revisit periodically, especially throughout the growing season, to see how your work areas are doing. And with this guide, you want to allow for overlap, right? The example privet is great to go after during winter, but a lot of invasive plants are great to go after during winter. It doesn't mean you can't go after them during the other seasons. So allow for overlap if you're using this guide. You want to play the long game. Most invasive plant problems are not emergencies. What's more important is consistency and long-term planning. And with that, let's get into our first season here. Winter. Winter's a great time, as all of you may already know, is a great time for invasive plant removal, simply because of the visibility that winter offers. You can see long distances, and you can see those evergreen plants. Many of our invasive plants are evergreen, and they stand out during the winter, right? So that makes them easy to spot and easy to go after. A good task for the winter months is to clean the trees of invasive vines, right? You want to preserve native vines. Again, we go back to identification, and it's so important. If you're removing the common ivy or the wisteria off of the trees, you want to be aware of the native vines that happen to be there, your crossvine, your Virginia creeper, your climbing hydrangea. So again, identification is very important because it's easy to just go up to a tree and remove all the vines, but we want to preserve those native vines for obvious reasons. We all know that native plants, they provide for our local wildlife, but those native plants that exist, they also hold space in our forest. If we take them away, the invasive plants, the invasive vines are going to quickly fill those voids faster than the native vines will. So Nandina is a great target during winter, right? Those clustered berries are easy to spot. So it's a very good identification tool to know that that's Nandina. And when you're dealing with invasive seeds and invasive berries, best practice is to try to bag and trash any ripened berries. And that's easier said than done for some plants. If you look at privet or honeysuckle, like they seed so much and produce so many berries, it's not really practical to think that you're going to bag all of them up and trash them every time you see them. However, with Nandina, the way they're clustered together, you can easily snip those off, toss them in a bag. So we make it a practice to trash Nandina berries as we come upon them. Nandinas, they've got some tough root systems. With most plants, small saplings, you can pull them up by hand, but a lot of times you will need some digging tools or an uprooter to get the Nandina out of the ground. This is honeysuckle vine, and I included this with our winter targets, mainly because, again, with the visibility, a lot of times the honeysuckle vine is in the mix of everything, and it's tangled up with all your small saplings and all your bushes, and during the growing seasons when everything's leafed out, it's really hard to get a grasp on just how extensive the honeysuckle vines can be. But the winter provides that visibility, and instead of pulling those the vines, the honeysuckle vines, instead of just pulling at them, that'll often snap, you want to trace it back to the nodes or trace it back to the roots and remove it by the node or the root. It's relatively weak in that it'll uproot kind of easily once you get to it. But that's a fun winter. It's a fun winter target, in my opinion. Leatherleaf Mahonia is a great winter target. It stands out. It's got those holly-like green leaves, evergreen, obviously. It flowers during the winter, so if you catch it during the winter before it's gone to seed, then you prevented another generation of Mahonia berries that can potentially be spread around by wildlife. Kind of like Nandina, Mahonia has big bulky root system too that you can dig it out, but it's going to create a lot of disturbance. So, think about it.
Oh, boo.
Michael, I believe you're muted. If you could unmute yourself, please.
I'm sorry, I don't know how that happened. How much did I miss? How much did y'all miss?
20 seconds.
Oh, not long. Okay.
No.
Cool. So yeah, I was talking about another great winter task is to clean up the large woody debris. and give yourself access to the work area. You can use that woody debris to build berms or to border things like your trails. And with common ivy, it's great to pull, again, using the winter. Everything's dormant during the winter, so take advantage of the winter dormancy to go after some of those invasive ground covers like common ivy. Much easier to pull after a soaking rain, but that's most things, right? Now with this guide, we've got a couple of spots labeled other, and with the idea is if you were going to print this out, then if you have site specific tasks that are very specific to your site, then you would write them in these spaces where it says other. And that's the idea with that. All right, y'all. So now we've got hopefully past all the technical difficulties. I'll throw it to Eli. Do we have any questions so far?
I think you answered Kevin's question, but I'll let Kevin determine that.
What was his question?
Yeah, Michael, I just had a question regarding removal of vines off of trees. A lot of times ivy will be mixed in with crossvine or some other native vine, and I find it hard to take the ivy out without disturbing the native. Any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah. So once you've ID'd the native, that's the big step. Once you've ID'd it and you want to protect it, and my advice for that is just to go slow. A lot of times, like poison ivy, which we know is a native vine, but it'll be like intermingled with that English ivy growing up the tree. So sometimes you have to make a call, right? You might have to sacrifice that poison ivy vine to take the English ivy vine. But the goal would be to leave the native vines best you can. And again, with vines, you want to cut off that water source. The important thing is to cut that gap. We try to go about chest high and then cut everything down below, and then either uproot it from the ground or cut it at the ground. So you're cutting off its water source and not allowing it to climb.
Michael,
Sounds good.
can you speak a little to, we have a very early spring ephemeral season here in the South. Of course, I say that as there's a little bit of ice and snow on the ground, but we can have stuff coming up pretty early. How does the seasonality of spring wildflowers or late winter wildflowers overlap with the management decisions you're making, the type of work you're doing and where you're working in these forests that might have trillium, bloodroot, stuff like that?
Yeah, that's top priority once we get into February and March is to locate those native spring ephemerals so that we can protect them moving forward. And sometimes we will flag them. That way we don't forget about them, when we get into fall and winter of the next year. We just always want to know where they are. In spring, so let's just get right into it. Spring is the great time for monitoring and prevention. Again, make note of the locations of those spring ephemerals, protect them as needed. But there's also invasive spring ephemerals that you want to watch out for too. A big one that we see in our waterways in Atlanta is called lesser celandine. And that is one that, Eli, I know that's a vicious one. So you want to catch it early. It's in the buttercup family. You can see it here. It's got that common buttercup flower there. But it's one that if you don't get it early, right, it quickly can turn into an infestation. And when it gets at this stage, you're really going to need to seek professional consultation, because it's not something that you can just go and pull out of the ground, right? It's got all those tubers in the ground. You basically have to excavate 6 inches out and then sift out the dirt to get all those tubers. It's just not practical to remove by hand. So that's why you want to catch it early, and that's why spring is so important for that monitoring and prevention. Now, we won't get into daffodils, but bush honeysuckle makes a great spring target. And a big reason for that is because it's one of the first to leaf out. It also retains its leaves, into fall and winter a lot longer than most plants too. So it makes it a good target then. But the difference here, right, in the spring, it doesn't have those berries present that you have to worry about. But it kind of just glows in spring. You can spot it from pretty far away, so it makes for a great target. Bush honeysuckle is relatively shallow rooted. It's got sprawling root system, so you can create a lot of disturbance when you're uprooting bush honeysuckle. But something that I recently read is that you don't have to remove all of those sprawling root fragments from bush honeysuckle. You just need to remove that root collar, is what they called it, at the base. So that's something that I'm going to try to remember moving forward. And as an effort to minimize our soil disturbance as we remove these plants. Here's chaff flower again, y'all. We're gonna keep talking about it. Chaff flower in its early growth spring stage, right? If you can catch it early and dig it up, get it out of there. If you only got 1 or 2 chaff flower plants in your work site, you are doing good. If you don't have any chaff flower in your work site, then consider yourself lucky. It is one that I hear around Atlanta the most often. People bring up to me about what is this plant and how do I get rid of it. So I think it was first spotted around Atlanta in 2012, and I think it's spreading and it's continuing to spread. So anything that you can do in its early stages to get at it, to remove it, again, top priority in my opinion. You don't want it to get to this stage. This is I won't name this place, but we call this the chaff flower ditch. Um, you, you don't want it to get it like this. Again, that's why monitoring is so important. And that brings us into summer. So we're just going to move right along. Everybody's okay with that? We don't need to pause after everyone, right? Summer's a great time to cut back your woody invasive plants if you can't uproot them. I want to stress the value of just cutting things back, even though you're not killing the plant. There is value in that, and your timing will help you in those efforts as well. Summer's a good time because, right, that's when they tell you not to prune your bushes, your native bushes or your native trees that you're trying to improve the health of, because if those high temps and the increased
volume up.
Do I need to turn my volume up?
No, I apologize.
Okay. So right, the high temps, the increased insect habits, decreased insect activity, it can leave a plant open up for disease as you cut it back during the summer months. So that's why if we're dealing with invasive plants that we want to weaken or possibly kill by cutting back, then summer's a great time to do that. And right, think opposite of normal pruning, right? Where normal pruning, you don't want to cut past that collar or past that bark ridge. But when you're cutting to hurt the plant, as cruel as it sounds, and yes, it's cruel, and I don't take it lightly. But so you do the opposite. So you cut past that collar. And this photo here it's a photo of Ellie Agnes. And we actually cut back a whole stand of Ellie Agnes, and we didn't uproot it, and we didn't use any herbicide. We just simply cut it back using this method and had great results with it. We only had to come back, a couple of times afterwards to retrim any new growth. And I will say that not all species respond this way. Some species, it's not this easy. Some species you have to be really diligent in getting back in repeated cuttings. But if you think about it, if you're cutting things back, you're taking away some of those invasive qualities that it has, right? Your shrubs, they can't get tall and they can't shade things out if you don't let them. Also, if you're cutting things back repeatedly, they won't flower and they won't go to seed. So they can cut back on the spread on that, and maybe eventually it'll actually kill that plant that you can't uproot for whatever reason. Summer's a great time to target prolific invasive annuals. Hairy crabweed, beefsteak plant are two very common ones here in Atlanta that I see everywhere. They're annuals, they're prolific seeders. So if you can pull them before they go to seed or those seeds ripen, you're in better shape. If they have already seeded, then you need to bag and trash best you can. And that brings us to stiltgrass. Invasive stiltgrass is super common. I'm sure you all know. Very, very common around Atlanta. It is very fun to say beefsteak plant. That's funny. Yeah. But stiltgrass, so we put it in the summer section, and for a very important reason. Obviously, it goes to seed in the summer, so it goes to seed in late summer, so you want to pull it before it goes to seed for best results. One thing about identifying stiltgrass, right? You see that silver streak right down the middle. That's a very identifying characteristic of stiltgrass. And why wait until late, or why wait till midsummer to pull this? Well, if you let it grow tall, it pulls up in big handfuls much easier. And if you pull it too early in the growing season, there's a chance you're going to stimulate more germination of seeds that are in that seed bank. So you have to come back through and pull more stiltgrass that same year anyways. Excuse me. So timing is key for stiltgrass. And you want to be on the lookout for your native lookalikes, right? Stiltgrass has a couple of native lookalikes, but here's one that we see a lot of. This is our native Learsia, also called Virginia cutgrass or Virginia whitegrass. But as you can see, it lacks that silver streak on the blade. Its inflorescence, they will nod all the way to the ground, unlike stiltgrass, but they look very similar from far away, and they often inhabit the same areas, these wet, shady areas. But Learsia is that's one that we want to try to nurture and try to get it to spread, and we try to collect seed and spread that around because it seems like it's a good competitor for stiltgrass. So we're definitely on the lookout for it. Oh, here's chafflower again. Oh my Lord. Just keeps coming. Just keeps like my dreams. Just keeps coming at me. All right. So as you can see here, this is a summer photo of chafflower. About this time, it's going to be 2 to 4 feet tall. This particular picture there, you don't see any seeds. So that's great. You want to go ahead and go after. You don't see any seeds, but pretty soon you are going to have those seed stalks. And they get long, and they will stick to your clothing, they will stick to your pets, and you will spread it around unknowingly. And again, it's one that you want to be on the lookout for and reduce the spread as much as you can. Those little seeds, they're called hitchhiker seeds because obviously they attach to you and you take them everywhere you go. And when chafflower gets to this stage, you're going to want to bag and trash it. I said with the privet and the bush honeysuckle, they produce so much seed that it's kind of impractical to think that you're going to bag it all. And it may be true for chafflower too, but it's one that you still should try. Bag as much as you can because these seeds have a germination rate over 90%. So if you are working in the chafflower, around it, or near it, you want to bag it and trash it. And if you're not targeting stilkgrass or targeting the chaff flower, stay out of it. If you're leading volunteers, have them stay out of it. Be aware of it. Stay out of it. All right, we're already into fall. Do we want to pause here and take any questions? Or we want to save them?
We can take some questions, definitely. Let's see.
There
In
you
the
go.
chat, we've got a couple things going on. Natalie asked about using Seek. I suggested iNaturalist, kind of one level up from Seek. But if Seek is your gateway app to get you into iNaturalist, then use Seek. Um, iNaturalist is a bit more robust and offers more for the community in terms of data as well. So that's my push. I also mentioned in the chat, some of you may not know, iNaturalist has been around, I think, at least 15 years. It's gotten really good. It's also incorporated as a 501c3 nonprofit as of 2023. So pretty cool. And I've even seen some really neat job postings from them, including some cool remote job postings. So if you're interested in that line of work, yes, and Susie is right. Yeah, you can post from Seek to iNaturalist as well. Other questions? There was a question a little further up in the thread about how do you find that the main node or the mother part of the honeysuckle? Is that something that you just spending time in the woods, you just kind of figured it out, Michael, or is there any sort of trick that you could share with us?
Well, I think it's as simple as just finding a vine and tracing it as far as you can to the ground. And sometimes you won't even make it to the ground before you find that node. And sometimes that node is rooted in the ground. But for us, it's just tracing back, just tracing back the vine as far as you can before you cut it or pull it.
Yep. Other questions? Let's see. Once Creeping Charlie is removed, is there anything that we should target to reseed or replant in that area?
Sure. I think there's a variety of things that you could plant or seed with, and that's something we haven't really talked about. And part of this guide, you can see in that in the box on the left side, right? Native seeds to collect and spread, and that's something that we try to we're trying more and more to incorporate into our work as we go. We find whatever ripened seeds are in that immediate area. I should say native ripened seeds that are in that area, and we want to, and we put those back into back behind our work into that disturbed soil, so we can go ahead and get that regenerative process started. There's one school of thought that says, well, once you remove the invasive plants, let's see what the native seed bank that's already there has to offer. And I do love that. And that's how we operate, and that's how I kind of did things for a while. But more and more, we're realizing that to really offer competition to these certain plants, such as your stiltgrass and your chaff flower, we need some additional help. So not only by collecting seeds that are around in your immediate area, but also if you can, there's some great online native seed. There's some great native seed companies that you can order from, and we do that too. We order from Roundstone Native Seeds, a variety of different seeds. And often when we remove, you know, a big swath of something, we want to make sure that we seed with something and we're not leaving that area susceptible to just another invasive plant or the same invasive plant. So we want to help out in that regard. I saw the question about beefsteak and when does it go to seed. I don't have an exact time, but it's going to go to seed during the summer. So early summer, if you can find the beefsteak plant before it's put up, before it's flowered, obviously you've got it. But even after it's flowered, you can remove it and not bag it. But at a certain point, it's seeds are going to be there and they're going to be viable, so you're going to want to bag it. So sometime in the summer. Okay. Shall I continue? Yep. All right. So we're now in the fall. Some great tasks for fall. Excuse me. And collect some leaves and use those leaves. That's free mulch. So if you can find some untainted leaves, whether they're in your neighbor's yard already bagged up for you, or they're in your own yard, or wherever, you want to make sure there's no invasive seeds in those leaves. But that's great. Again, free mulch, and it's great to use to put down back over your work area. And that improves the health of the soil and can suppress any invasives that might come back in there. Most of our plants, that's when the berries are ripe. So those invasive berries, you want to bag and trash again, best you can. And we talked a bit about this just now. You want to offer some native competition either with seeding or plants. Fall is a great time to plant. Get out there and plant some native plants. So even if you're focused on invasive removal, well, planting is a part of that. Offering competition to compete with those invasive plants is a big part of that. And that's something that we're concentrating more and more on these days, is not just the removal aspect, but the planting, the installation, the regeneration aspect of it as well. Porcelain berry is a great fall target just because of its those berries. They're so distinct, those pastel Easter looking berries. You're looking at porcelain berry when you see those berries. Best you can, try to bag and trash them, but again, they can produce so much that it may not be practical. What's more important is to trace that vine back to the ground and either uproot it or treat it accordingly. All right. Again, I mentioned chaff flower again here in fall because you want to bag and trash those seeds when you see it. Wisteria is a great fall target. Wisteria all from fall all the way into winter is a great target that for us, we once those leaves start to yellow, it's really easy to find the wisteria and target it. Again, you want to trace it. Don't let it climb. Most invasive vines, I would venture to say all invasive vines, they're really weakened if you don't let them climb. Don't let them, common ivy, English ivy, it needs to climb to be able to produce seeds. So the more that you can prevent these invasive vines from climbing, the better off you're going to be. Again, we all talked about seeds, but also during fall, take a break. This guy was helping me bag up some stiltgrass, and I told him he needs to slow down, so I just threw him in a pile of leaves and told him to chill out for a little while. So take a break, enjoy the fall colors, and take a breather. All right, now this section of the guide, we will just address, talk about some different tips for volunteer groups. And I feel like a lot of y'all that are here tonight are from Friends of Park groups. And so this is very appropriate for y'all. First of all, you want to try to always connect with your Friends of the Park groups. As y'all know, you want to make sure that you're following the rules of that park system, whether it's Atlanta, DeKalb, or Brookhaven, and having those open lines of communication are crucial, and they're only going to help in your efforts. Always have a plan. Scout the area before your volunteer event. If you can get out there, the day before, that's great. But even if you can get there 30 minutes earlier and scout the area, you want to, first of all, make sure there's nothing dangerous that your volunteers are going to walk into, whether it's a big thorny multi-floor rose thicket, or it's a hole in the ground, or it's a yellow jacket's nest, right? In the summer months, you're going to want to go and make sure there's no yellow jacket's nest in your proposed work area. And safety is top priority. You want to demonstrate proper tool use. I don't know if everybody knows the circle of death, but basically if you have a tool in your hand and you extend your arm, you should be able to turn around 360 degrees and you should not be able to touch anybody with your tool. Now nonprofits can register with Atlanta Community Tool Bank, to my understanding, so they can rent tools as needed. They have a wide variety of tools. If you're not familiar with the tool bank, it is a great resource for nonprofits and friends of groups. We talked about bagging seeds enough. Larger volunteer groups consider breaking up into different tasks. And don't forget about non-plant related tasks such as trash pickup or anything that you can think of. Because when we found that with large groups and everybody's doing the same thing, it's just kind of, you can find a lot of people just kind of standing around, which is fine, but also we just find it's much more efficient and fun if there's different goals and different tasks that different teams are working on. There are certain tasks that are not good for volunteers. I talk about chaff flower throughout this entire presentation, but honestly, if you have a big volunteer group, you're not going to want to send them into a big thicket of chaff flower. It's very meticulous, tedious work. So I would put a small group on the chaff flower and do the best you can. I should say small and experienced group on chaff flower. And there's other tasks and other plants too that you would want to treat the same way. So you want to be conscious about that. And y'all, I'm sure y'all all know this, and this is why y'all do what y'all do, and you're stewarding the parks that you are. That these, it's not about just the work itself. These volunteer events are about creating community, connecting with your community, education, with others who share a passion for the same things that you do, which is stewarding our green spaces. And all right, so what do we do with all these invasive plants after we remove them? Well, what we try to always do is try to leave it on site somewhere for it to decompose. If we can use it to our advantage in the form of creating, using the woody material to create a berm where we can help mitigate erosion or runoff water filtration, then we try to use it in that way. But a debris pile in itself is instant wildlife habitat. Like a variety of wildlife will use those piles, including, obviously chipmunks, blue jays. So yeah, it's kind of, there's no sense in wasting time and resources and having it hauled away, having some big truck with a big trailer come out and take all your stuff somewhere to do whatever with. So you want to leave it on site, let it decompose. You always want to be conscious about anything that can reroot. But the thing is, if you're putting in a pile and you're going to go check on that pile, like you're going to be okay. Most everything gets smothered by the sheer mass of the pile anyways. And then whatever does sprout, it'll be right there in that pile where you can immediately deal with it. It's not a big deal.
Michael, we had a question about
Sure.
cut and treat for English ivy vines. So I guess I'm going to go ahead and kind of expand on the question, but is there a threshold of size of vine? Like what's the diameter size? Because I'm sure most of us have seen, English ivy. I've seen it 6-inch diameter, like a woody tree, almost. So is there a threshold where you say, oh, this is an inch or greater, I'm going to cut and treat? So what's the threshold if there is one? And then I don't know if you use any herbicide at all, but if you do, is there a recommendation?
So I think the rule of thumb is anything under an inch you should not do cut and treat. And I think the reasoning behind that is there's not enough surface area for it to absorb the herbicide. So I would say an inch is, yeah, anything below an inch is too small for cut and treat. And then what was your question? We do cut and treat. We have our applicator's license at Woodskeeper. So we don't do any spraying, so I can't offer any advice on that. But we do cut and treat with herbicide. We use Ranger Pro, which is a glyphosate-based herbicide. It's ready to use if you're not mixing it to spray, which again, we don't. And we use that for a couple of reasons. It's not, glyphosate is not soil active. So it poses a lesser threat to nearby plants, non-targeted plants. Yeah. What else we got?
Any more questions? Feel free to throw them in the chat here.
Okay. So here we got to the to our guide, additional tips. I thought this was going to be a much larger section, but I kind of crammed everything up in that first important section. But I think it doesn't hurt to stress the fact that this work, the success is not eradication, it's suppression. Eradication is not a very practical goal, and it's not a necessary goal. The whole point is to make room for native plant diversity by suppressing the invasive plants and nurturing the native plants. It's simple as that. Work from the edges, protect the areas that have not been infested by invasive plants. Make that a goal. Don't just jump into the middle of the thickest stuff you see, protect what's already in decent shape before you go after that thick stuff, is as tempting as it might be. And obviously when you're looking at a large space, it gets really hard to determine which area is top priority. So I do understand that. So this Doug Tallamy quote is one that's always kind of stuck out to me, and it's I try to remind myself, like, it's not the invasive plants are not the problem, it's the lack of native plants, right? That's what destroys the food webs. So if we can simplify our goals to what we want to do is reduce monocultures. We want to reduce, like, see in this photo, there's one dominant species that's completely dominating this area. We remove that species. Now we've got like I can't even count the number of native species that just come rushing in there. We didn't plant any of those. That was all from the native seed bank. So just kind of simplifying, if you get too overwhelmed by what are we doing here, just simplifying it down to, suppression of invasive plants, encouraging native plants, because the end goal is always going to be native biodiversity. That's what we want. And here we got some resources. Again, you can download and print this guide if you would like. And really quick here, I'm not perfect with it, but always trying to improve and get better with it. But our language matters. When we're referring to these invasive plants and their behavior and how we manage them, it's important how we communicate to others. So we feel it's important to leave out the violent tones, avoid words that can, elicit feelings of nationalism and xenophobia and exclusion. And often, well, pretty much all, ask yourself, is it important that I use the country of origin in the common name? Most of the time it's not. Now, sometimes maybe you need, in the right context, sure, use the country of origin, but a lot of times it's not necessary, and it can elicit those feelings of exclusion when you're talking to others about it. There's different alternative terms that you can use, and for more on that topic, you can visit justlanguage.org.
I'll also put in a plug. We have a session at conference on this topic, and I'm really looking forward to it because it's kind of a hot topic right now. And it can get heated too. You know, people have very strong feelings and are passionate about this work, and we also tend to get entrenched in the language that we use. And I've been doing this work for 22, 23 years, and I've evolved myself. Um, and I think Michael nailed it. Language is important, period, right? No matter what you think about what words should be used or not used, language is important and it has implications. So I'm glad this conversation is happening, and I think this will probably be a standing room only session at conference this year. So another reason to join us at conference if you can.
Yeah. And really quick on that, like I personally, I, I use the word invasive, and I feel like that I'm going to continue to use the word invasive because it provides that sense of urgency. I've yet to hear a word that also provides that sense of urgency because I think it's important. But that it's a topic that I want to continue to talk about, and I'm going to go to that session during the conference. Um, just throwing that out there that it's not all black and white, right and wrong about the words that we use, but it's something to be conscious about. And oh yeah, we already plugged it once. Let's plug it again. Love your park. Spink Collins Park, Saturday, February 22nd. Y'all join us. Join us if you can. We'd love to have you out. Wendy Hogg and I are gonna we're gonna tackle some invasive vines. We're gonna focus on vines. We're gonna identification is going to be a big part of this. We're going to identify the vines, the native and the invasives before we remove them. It's going to be fun. That's a great point somebody just mentioned. It's not the plant that's bad for being there, right? There's no onus on the plant. The plant didn't choose to come here. It was introduced by humans. All right. Well, with that, Eli and Vanessa, we have any more questions? Let's fire away.
Let's see, I think we addressed most of what's in the chat, just going through. Did you talk about the appropriate timing? What months are appropriate for cut and treat?
I did not. Fall is the best time, right? Because everything's getting sucked down to the roots, so including the herbicide that you're painting on there. However, cut and treat, it's you're using concentrated herbicide. So even throughout the winter months, it's going to be effective to some degree. The only time we don't do cut and treat is a certain point during spring when everything's getting pushed up. So it's going to push out that herbicide. Um, but other than that, we use it year round. Georgia winters don't get frozen enough to not use it, to be honest with you. And from what I've read, they use it up north throughout winter anyways, too.
Another tip that I'll throw out there, something that helped me a lot in my forest management journey when I was at Fernbank. And it started as me going out in the late winter and into spring months and basically starting a phenology calendar. So looking at when spring wildflowers were coming up and making note of that on a calendar, literally putting it on my Outlook calendar. Simple as that. And the reason I did that is there was an article in a publication in the 1970s that looked at bloom times for spring wildflowers in this 5-year period in the 1970s in Fernbank Forest. And I thought, well, how cool. I'm here now, 45 years later. Let's see how it's changed. And I was able to I think I got 6 or 7 years of data. I took some averages. This was not a scientific study, but I was just kind of looking at trends. And I saw that on average, these same species in literally the same forest are blooming on average 2 to 3 weeks earlier than they were 45 years ago. And the reason I bring that up is because it led to other habits that I found very useful in forest management. And that was, I started with just marking when the native wildflowers came up and were blooming. And then I started marking, oh, when does the bush honeysuckle leaf out, like Michael mentioned? Because I happened to notice, like, that seems like an early one. So I'd put that on the calendar. And I'm literally just using Outlook. Like, I started a separate calendar just for forest phenology. And I would put, when is the chaff flower going to seed? When is, any kind of like high profile target species I would put in there, and then I could see trends, things that you think, oh, I'm going to remember this. This is first week in March. I'm going to remember it next year. You might not. But if you throw it on the calendar, you can just go back and look like, oh, okay, well, you can look ahead 2 weeks or a month and say, gosh, we got a volunteer project next month. What was happening in February last year? And get an idea of, oh, you know what? The daffodils were up, but the trillium wasn't up yet. So we can still get some work done without, um, stepping on the trillium or something like that. So that can go a long way. And it's really cool to just mark your observations of what you're seeing in your green space, or maybe it's just your backyard, your front yard, wherever. Throw it on the calendar. And before you know, a season's gone by, a year's gone by, 5 years have gone by, and you have a mountain of data that you can look at.
All right, I see a question here. The best strategy for removing yellow flag iris in marshy areas. I don't have an answer for that. There's some at Grant Park that we've yet to really tackle. We're kind of monitoring it. So sorry, Kevin, I don't have a good answer for that, but I can try to look that up and I can email you any control strategies that I can find.
Yeah, that would be great, Michael.
Sure.
What about controlled burns, Michael? Got any experience? We have a question. With a larger property, is burning or mowing a better method for boosting the chance of native plants to outcompete the unwanted ones? And I'm I can tell you this is not a simple answer. This will be nuanced depending on a number of factors. But she also asked, what is the best time to do this and not adversely affect bird migration? Property is mostly native but needs some help.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have any experience with controlled burns. I hear and read, great things about it and how it's, it was used for centuries before, before Europeans colonized here. Native communities use burning as a way to manage the land, and I think there's a big push to bring that back. I personally don't have any experience. I hope to get involved with some of the learn and burn sessions that Georgia DNR and Birds Georgia are doing this year, so I can learn more about it. So I don't have a solid answer on that, not yet.
I mentioned our buddy Gabe over at Birds, Georgia. I think Gabe has his burn card. He's been certified to do controlled burns, and obviously works on improving bird habitat. Reach out to Gabe. I don't recall his email right offhand, but I think he's on their website, and I can try to dig that up too. But Gabe Andrle, Andrle, over at Birds, Georgia, would definitely be able to help you out.
Yeah. Good old Gabe. The flower blooming behind me in that photo is butterweed, or Pacra glabella, which is an annual plant. See it all over Atlanta, definitely in riparian areas. And it's a great native plant that we try to collect the seeds and put it back behind our work as well. But we're I don't like the name butterweed. We called it the wrong name for a while because we had misidentified it, and now it's butterweed. We know it's butterweed, but I don't like saying butterweed. If anybody's got a better name for butterweed, I'd love to hear it.
It's trying to show my screensaver. It's butterweed, but it's not working on my camera. It's my daughter in a field of butterweed.
Yeah,
Such a lovely plant. Good
it
to
is.
look out for in springtime.
For sure. And the seeds for butterwheat are ripe in May. The end of April and May is when you want to go for it. Let's see. Do I see a question about cherry laurel? Okay, from Rob. Michael, I saw your post on cherry laurel and how we should wait to remove that until all other woodies have been removed. Any other invasive plants that support wildlife that we should focus on later in the restoration process like that? Right, so cherry laurel is it's a tricky one. It's a coastal plains native. It's very abundant here in Atlanta and abundant to the point where it can really cut down on your native biodiversity. It's an evergreen tree. Evergreen, you call it what you want, shrub, tree. It's definitely a tree. And it can create thickets and really reduce that diversity. So that's why we recommend removing cherry laurel. This is Carolina cherry laurel. We will recommend removing it. However, if you don't have a lot of other mid-story to work with, then you might want to consider leaving it and replacing it over time. Because one thing that we know that the cherry laurel is a pollinator magnet, right? Is definitely used extensively by local wildlife. So that's what makes it that's why there's a big difference between cherry laurel and your non-native invasive plant. But its qualities, the way it's evergreen and the way it can really crowd out other plants is why we recommend removing them. I can't think of another plant that could be considered, not native to the Piedmont that you might want to keep. Maybe southern magnolias kind of lumped in sometimes with cherry laurel. It's not native to the Piedmont and it can really crowd out and shade out our Piedmont forest. But obviously, southern magnolias provide for local wildlife too in various ways. And on that note, we should always mention that a lot of times you hear that non-native invasive plants have zero ecological value, and that is false. The shelter that invasive shrubs provide in general is ecological value. So it's something to think about when you're removing large amounts of shrubs is what are you doing to replace that shelter? Are you planting more shrubs behind it? Are you building berms? Are you putting the debris piles in the kind of the same general area so you can kind of at least replace some of that shelter that you're removing?
So, Michael, we had a question about southern magnolias.
Sure.
I answered from my point of view. The question is, do you remove them? I said it kind of just depends. It depends, right? We took them out of fern make forest. For me, it was partially an aesthetic thing in the wintertime. We had 300-year-old trees and in the springtime, a diverse herb layer. And it just wasn't the right place for those trees. But other places on campus, they were utilized for screening. They were already a part of the landscape before I started managing there, and I chose to leave them. So it depends on the context and your goals and the situation.
Yeah, I agree with that. And a lot of the things that we teach and that we repeat. Um, Honestly, for me personally, T from Ecologic has been a huge teacher. And what T is used to describe the cherry laurel and the southern magnolia is that they are overrepresented here in the Piedmont. There's so many of them that they have a adverse effect on our biodiversity. Again, because they're evergreen, they shade things out. Southern magnolias are alleliopathic, meaning they put out a chemical that prohibits other plants from growing around them and underneath them. Um, so yes, we're not equipped to remove like huge trees, but we definitely more and more when we see small southern magnolias, we're removing them because we know how they behave here in the Piedmont. And let's talk about our sweet bay magnolia, right? We've got a wonderful native Piedmont, the Piedmont native in the sweet bay magnolia that they're making a big push to try to change our state flower to, which is currently the Cherokee rose, which is an invasive plant. It's on the invasive official Georgia list. So there's a big push to get it changed to our state flower to the sweet bay magnolia. So I'm a big sweet bay magnolia fan these days. Thoughts on Yopon holly? Excuse me. Yopon holly, similar to the same conversation here with the coastal plains native. If you look at a native range map, you might see some of these like creeping into the Piedmont. Yopon holly, I asked Laura, who's with the Georgia Native Plant Society, about Yopon holly. And she said she didn't have a strong opinion either way. Like, it doesn't seeing it doing enough adverse damage or enough crowding out of things that where she sees it as a problem. Right now, typically when we see Yopon holly at a site, we are leaving it. We are not removing it. It is definitely it's used by native wildlife. If you look at the leaves, they are someone's always eating on those Yopon holly. But I've heard that it can get a little aggressive here in the Piedmont. And that's the thing, like sometimes you just need to make a decision. Like maybe you want to keep that Yopon holly, maybe you want to keep that Southern magnolia. And that's the difference in these between non-native invasive plants and these, plants that aren't necessarily native to the Piedmont, but they're native to Georgia. Maybe there is a place temporarily here as a placeholder that you can use them for.
And I dropped in the chat there is a holly, an invasive holly, Asian species, Ilex crenata, that looks very similar to Yopon, and it was probably 2 or 3 years of me noticing it in Fernbank Forest and thinking it was Yopon before I realized the difference. So if you haven't compared those side by side, via Google search, or sometimes I'll put, someone has done a blog post or something, Ilex crenata versus Ilex vomitoria. Plug that in, look at the differences. They're subtle, and you might realize that what you thought you had is actually something different. So if it's creeping right into the middle of a shaded forest, I would bet it's crenata and not vomitoria. But it goes back to something Michael mentioned earlier about ID is really, really important. So take your time instead of making that management decision on the ground. If you're unsure, ask folks. Send a text. I get messages all the time. I get pictures. Hey, what's this plant? A lot of times it's unknown numbers, and I'm like, okay, cool. If I know, I let them know, and then I ask, who is this? Ask around. Do some research before you decide whether it absolutely has to go.
Yeah. I'm not too familiar with boxwood. I think boxwoods do look very similar to the uh, Ilex crenata, but I think they're different. I think they're different species, and we haven't found too many like when I think of boxwood, I think of like shrubs around the house that often get planted. And I'm not seeing those too much in the wild. The wild of Atlanta.
All right. Any final questions, concerns, comments? Took a bit distinguishing Chamber bitter from partridge pea. Yes, those legumes look similar, right? A lot of them. I think I called everything mimosa when I first moved back to the South that looked like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it can be tricky.
Yeah, we have a good side by side. I don't have the photos accessible, but a good side by side of chamber bitter versus mimosa versus partridge pea, and they look very, very, very similar. So I'll have to get those photos together and do a little side by side image.
Yeah, and I think it's important to realize that we're going to make mistakes. We're going to misidentify things. Um, and to just accept that and own it, and it's okay. That's when we learn. That's when we grow, right? So even the people that you think are so-called experts, we make mistakes, and this is a big trend in this sector now. Is what they call, developing adaptive management plans. You got to be able to pivot and adapt and move, and it's not, the conditions are not stagnant in your area, and the knowledge base that we're pulling from is not stagnant either. So it's important to have some have some adaptability and take time to enjoy the woods. Take time to enjoy nature. You will burn yourself out in this field if you're not careful. And I went in guns blazing as a 23-year-old out of undergrad in California, and I just fell in love with native plants there and this work. And it I could do that at 23 years old. Now, much older, I can't do that. You got to make sure that it's fun, it's enjoyable. One of the things someone with GNPS told me years ago at a volunteer event, they said, start slow and then slow down. And it's like my favorite thing to tell volunteer groups, because they don't expect that second part. We're going to start slow, everybody, and then we're going to slow down, right? This is not a race. We want to enjoy this. We want to learn from each other. And some of those conversations that I have with people while we're out pulling weeds, it's just that time is invaluable. I just absolutely love it. So into that. Or if you like to be alone, the cool thing about this kind of work is you can go to a volunteer event and then you can go off to your own little corner in the woods and commune with nature on your own while you give back to nature. So I really appreciate everybody being here. And Michael, this is great that you've been able to join us and share your insight. So thank you, Michael. Thank you, Vanessa, for supporting us tonight as well. We will be following up. I think you'll get an email from Vanessa. We'll have resources. If this recording worked out, you'll have a link to that. You will have Michael's PDF as well. Reach back out to us if questions or thoughts come up later. Please, we are a resource, all of us.
Cool. Thanks, Eli, and thanks everyone for coming. It was fun.
Yes, thank you. Take care.
Thanks, guys. Have a great evening.